Earlier today, Sony tweeted out that their back button attachment was now available at retailers, which caught me off guard a little bit because I didn't think it was going to be available until the 23rd, I thought. But it was in stores. They said you can go pick it up. I double checked. The Walmart near me had it, and I went out and picked up the DualShock 4 Back Button Attachment. It was something I was pretty interested in. One, it has an OLED screen, and that's kind of strange, to see that, but it is an interesting idea to add macro buttons to your current controller rather than having to buy a SCUF or the Astro C40 or any of those like customized third-party controllers. This is an accessory that Sony themselves made first party. So a lot of times we're used to buying third-party accessories for Sony's system. This is one that they tackled themselves, it appears. So today, let's take a look at the DualShock 4 Back Button Attachment. Again, if you guys enjoy these kind of videos with the accessories and the looks at them, make sure you hit the like button while you're here. So here we are with the DualShock 4 Back Button Attachment. I picked this up at Walmart, and interestingly enough, it wasn't the full $30. They sold it to me for $25, so I don't know if Walmart's doing what they do with some of their games is they mark them down a percentage when it comes out. I'm not sure if they're doing that with accessories like this, but it was a bit cheaper than I was expecting to pay when they did ring it up at the register. So it's a pretty straightforward box. I mean, really, this isn't set up to be like, think of like the Xbox Elite Series controller. It's not set up to be super expensive, nothing like that. So a more minimalistic box kind of makes sense for what this is exactly. They do have information on the back about an OLED screen, programmable back buttons, of course, and that stereo headset jack will follow through, so you will still be able to plug in your headphones or any type of anything you would normally plug into the bottom, minus that little extension, the extension port that you technically lose for this. But if you just have like headphones that you plug in, you can still use those. We'll go ahead and unbox this, although it is a pretty straightforward unboxing. You have the back button here, and then you have some information about how to use it. There is some paperwork that you may want to read through just to make sure you have all of kind of like the way to navigate without any actual buttons outside of that OLED button, really, and the two back buttons. Like, you don't have any way to really navigate outside of those. So this is our attachment here, the back button attachment. It's pretty light, but I mean, it's going to be added on to the weight of your PlayStation 4 controller, so they probably didn't want to add too much extra there. I imagine it's fairly hollow in here, and we'll see if we can get it apart because there are no visible screws right this second looking at it. Now we, of course, have kind of the screen protector plastic piece there because this is an OLED screen. That is all plastic right there, and when you press it down, when it is attached to the controller, seeing as how it pulls power from the controller, you will have a few things light up, although it's not even on that much. Like, it actually turns itself off pretty quick, so I can't imagine this is actually going to use that much power, and it probably will be negligible, I would say, on battery life just based on what they're doing here and what that OLED screen's job is. I think a lot of people hear OLED screen and they imagine that it's going to absolutely destroy the battery life. It will impact it in some way, but I doubt it's going to be that much. Now, the two back buttons here, they are two pieces of plastic kind of on top, and you press them down. The whole thing moves, however, only this side clicks. So the center does not click. You have to actually press out here, which means there is a bit of a sweet spot to it. And they have this kind of lined up, and when we do put it on this controller here, you'll see that it is actually in a very, very good spot to just press this part that's curved. They definitely took some time to figure all of that out. One thing I don't really like about this attachment is the way it connects to your controller, which we're going to do in a second. This piece here is on a hinge. And the reason for that is because of the way that the PlayStation 4 controller is shaped and the direction that the port for this, that headphone port on the bottom and the little expansion port, actually faces when it is sitting down. So of course you look at it and you say, okay, it seems to be just facing out the bottom. However, if you set it down on the table, it actually points up. It's up a bit more, so they had to account for that when this goes on. And I'm not a big fan of when you put this on, it almost feels like it's trying to break, and they tell you grip it like this, right? So you have your thumb on it, and then just kind of line it up as best you can, and they literally just tell you to push. And you have to hope, there we go, that hinge will actually function and kind of work itself into place. It doesn't feel the greatest, and when you are putting on there, you might feel like you're going to break it, and then you kind of move it around a little bit, and then it'll start to push forward, and that hinge will kick in. So I'm not the biggest fan of how this thing goes on. However, if you're someone who just plugs in through the charge cable at the top, you're probably going to put this on and then leave it. Myself, however, I do use a charging dock for all of my controllers pretty much. I think it's the Nyko one, and that actually has different charge pieces for the top of each one so that it can connect at that point when you set it down. Cannot use it though with this back button assembly. So if I'm going to leave this on, I wouldn't be able to use that anymore, or I would have to basically pop this off when I'm done with it, put it to the side, and then this would work. So for someone like me, I actually would be taking this off and putting it back on several times, and I'm not completely sold on how it goes on. I think Sony might want to look at that again. But once it's on, we'll go ahead and hit this. We'll turn the PS4 on across the room there. That way you can get an idea as to how this works. So here is, right here, our OLED screen. It already went off. It goes off pretty quick. In fact, it actually has a little timer, which is that circle around P1 that will technically count down with that bar disappearing as it goes around in a circle. So you see it there, and then it will count down. So it's on for like 5 seconds at the most, unless you start playing around with it, which we can here now. So we'll press that, and you can double tap. You can go through different profiles you have set up. So here I have R1 and L1 on either side there. I have circle and then cross there. And then I have a cross on this side and circle on this side. So you can set up 3 different profiles, which is nice. And I guess technically you can change between them, but that does bring up one issue I have, which we'll get to in a second here. And if you want to, say, change number 3, you press and hold, and all of a sudden you can start cycling through, even at the same time, all of the different buttons that you can use for these paddles, which pretty much includes everything. There's all the direction buttons on the D-pad there. There's L1, there's R1, L2, R2, L3, R3. So the clicks on those joysticks can be put on there. Even the option button can be used, and it looks like we even have a little cancel button there, as well as triangle, circle, cross, square, and then all of our direction buttons again. So they do have quite a few in there, which is good. Of course, you can't seem to map like home or anything like that from what I can see here. So it's they have it pretty much set up as stuff you would actually use in the game. Also, as far as I can tell, this just communicates with the controller and not the system itself, which means that as long as the controller is hooked up to anything, this should work fine. PC, PS3, think of any of that stuff that this goes through an adapter. It should work fine because the system itself does not detect this. This does not communicate with the system. It just communicates with the controller. It sends inputs to that controller that I'm using here. So anything that you kind of programmed back here should work when you're using it on a device like your PC, which is pretty cool for anyone who maybe wants something like this for the PS4 controller and they don't want to go out and get a scuff controller. They don't want to go out and get the C40 $200 Astro controller. I understand if you already have it and you're like, oh, this is $25 to $30 depending on where I get it, and it'll work for the other platforms because my PS4 controller does when I hook it up. Yeah, it's not a bad value. And you can see when you're holding it like this and you're using it like normal, your 2 fingers here on the back are in great position to press them. They definitely took some time to figure out, obviously, how you would hold it and the ergonomics and all of that, but that is actually a really good spot and it's very comfortable. The buttons are harder to press down. There's a bit more tension, so there's not really going to be a lot of accidental presses just from playing normally, and that's good. I am okay with the base down here. It does add some size to the controller, as you can see. And one of the things that's kind of annoying to me is that the screen is on the back, mostly because I think they probably could have put it on the front here. And considering you can change between macros or profiles that you have set up for your macros, I should say, I think it'd be better to have it here just in case you want to cycle through while maybe you have them all set up for a specific competitive game, maybe different game types in that game, and you're like, oh, I want to switch to, maybe I want both of these to be R1 or L1 or something. Oh, wait, nope, now I want to change to cross and circle. You would just double tap that guy there. I think that'd be a lot better. It'd be easier to get to, whereas you kind of have to move around a bit, and because you're double tapping, you're gonna really, and then you can't see which one you're in. Maybe you start to memorize them, but I think like we have space here. I'm just not really sure why that screen isn't here unless Sony was worried about it being distracting or something. I don't know. I just think I would have preferred it to be right here, front and center. I'm like, okay, I'm in profile 3, we're good. Oh, wait, let me go to 1. All right, now we're good. But I will say, I do like the feel of this attachment. I think it's pretty good, especially if you're someone who's been kind of contemplating the idea of a more expensive controller specifically because you want macro buttons on the back, right? That's not a bad thing to pick up at its price. I think it's okay. It's definitely for a specific audience, and that's probably why Sony didn't put a ton of money and resources into this. I mean, this is a very basic OLED screen. The overall design is very basic. It's very minimalistic for the most part, obviously minus an OLED screen. But I think this is a good pickup if you are someone who wants those back buttons, who likes the idea of them in like a SCUF controller or in the C40, but you don't need all the extra stuff. Like, there's a lot of stuff there outside of just those back buttons. I think this is a cool idea, and I think it's good for people who already have a PlayStation 4 controller that you can just go pick this up and use it. And of course, now we'll go ahead and we'll break this guy down real quick. The only spot I can imagine there being screws is under this kind of this rubberized part here, because there's no screws anywhere else, and a lot of times these companies like to hide stuff under these. And I'm correct, there's a screw here, a screw here. I'm hoping it's just the two on the edges. That would be nice. So I pretty much just decided to rip this whole thing off. I can glue it back, but that way I can show where all the screws are for the off chance that you have to take this this guy apart. We have a couple of larger screws around the corners here, and then two smaller screws on the edges. Okay, so I was trying to figure out why this wasn't coming apart on this side specifically. Turns out you actually have to pop the screen up and these screws as well. So this all pops off, then you gotta flip it over, pop the screen off, as you can see it like that. Because it is an OLED screen, it's very, very thin, it's very small, it's actually encased in this plastic here. But you have to actually flip it over, pop the screen out as well to get to some screws, and the button, by the way. So there is actually a button behind this screen, and because it's up against it and it has the ability with these clips to kind of float a little bit, just enough to give it some leeway to be pressed on top of that button there. And with those screws out, this actually pops right off now, and we can see everything here, which includes our buttons for the sides, which do appear to be just directly soldered to the board in the middle here, and they actually are melted with plastic so they don't move. They didn't even use screws on that. But they do have screws here and here, which those screws appear to hold the button, technically like this plastic part, in place as it goes through and attaches to it. And that way it can kind of free float, press the button, and then spring back. Then we of course have our connector here that is on that hinge that then runs through a ribbon cable to the board here. This one is our button, and it's actually soldered to the board. So this button here that the OLED screen sits on top of is completely soldered to the main board here. So like I said, nothing too crazy with this guy in terms of how it's built and put together. It's definitely designed to save money, but the OLED screen is kind of funny. It's pretty small. It's just basically in this little plastic disc essentially, and it's designed so that it can kind of rest and move around as it needs to, specifically so that you can press down when you have to switch between profiles or change any of the button macros. And that's going to do it for the back button attachment for the DualShock 4. Not a bad device. I think it's cool for people who want that those macro buttons on the back that you can map yourself. The OLED screen is interesting, but I mean, it doesn't really hurt the experience at all. I just think it would have been better if it was flipped to the front. Otherwise, having to put it on, actually put the attachment on and off is one of the weaknesses, I think, because it's so awkward to do. But if you charge through your cable, you probably don't ever really have to take it off unless it starts to annoy you or get in the way for whatever reason. But cool device. It'll be interesting to see if the PS5 has macro buttons on the back, and this might actually work to future-proof the DualShock 4 going forward. Thanks, guys, for watching. If you're new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below so you can see more accessory and system reviews as we go forward, and I pick them up. And I'll see you guys next time.